Good morning, Greg here, MasterTrader morning update. So S&P spent the whole week just churning back and forth up here at this major resistance area. As we've talked about, the weekly is still in an uptrend and it's pulled back to the rising 20. Thought it would get closer to this support area here, but it had created this support, the bottoming tail, and then the retest. And after the gap up and a little move to that resistance, has just been like hit a brick wall. And interesting, I don't have the news on, but something got the futures moving up here a little while ago, and they popped up to this little resistance. Doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot, just in relation to what's been going on the last week or so. So we'll see what that does here at the open, whether they're ready to attempt to push up through here. Ideally, they would spend some time consolidating and then a push. To happen on a Friday, and we have this French election coming up. I think it's on Sunday. So, the last time, they had their election, which was indecisive. The markets gapped up on that indecisive event. And now there's going to be a decisive event on Sunday, so we'll see what happens there, and whether it's going to be similar to the U.S. election. Do they want the status quo? Do they want a Hillary, or do they want a change? And I don't know if this lady is supposed to be the connection or of a Trump. We'll see, but I suppose that if you want big change, I think that's the dynamics that are going on there, the status quo or big change. So we shall see what happens Sunday evening and what effect that has on our markets on Monday morning. So the NASDAQ popped up as well. It's up against this resistance up here from several days ago. And what price is extended this far from its moving average and price support, you would think it's going to pull back here a bit and maybe a retest of this high, or obviously it could go sideways. But usually a breakout that's going to be reliable has a longer base prior to the breakout versus a little several days and then a move. So this is not a breakout I'm interested in. Rather, it may actually be a breakout failure, or it may just go sideways. At this time, we just sit on our hands and do nothing. If it starts to break down, well, then we're interested on the downside, since it is extended here, looking for a move. Even though it's in an uptrend, it's extended, so we could get a pullback within a strong uptrend. The Dow futures have just been chopping. Yesterday was a whipsaw back and forth, so nothing really there. More of a pattern to stay away from until something sets up. But there's a little bit of a lesson in that when you see patterns like this with tails and erratic price action, trying to make sense out of it, go to the higher time frame. And it's clear on the weekly time frame it's in an uptrend and it's just consolidating right now. So if it closes the week with this inside bar on the weekly time frame, we're going to have a pretty good line in the sand as to see whether it can move above or below, above or below, and we'll see what happens there. I've talked about bonds and as a guide for the markets, and since they've moved down here. Well, the NASDAQ was going up. Actually, I'll show you the chart that we were looking at. We were looking for whether they could break to the upside here or break to the downside. And, they've gone down here, and now it's really gone nowhere. And now they're going to start, we can look at what's happening here. Pre-market, they're just whipping back and forth, so a lot of indecisiveness there. We really have nothing to, really give us an edge as to what's going to happen here with this type of whippy price action that's going on. Now, oil, they got clobbered yesterday, and it came down into this support area here, and it started its bounce, and it's just chopping around here. So it's pretty extended. Maybe get more of a bounce here. I remember saying when it was coming down here, the way it was acting, I wasn't interested in doing anything. When it's at that support, my assumption was just that anything at support after such a drop, that you get some type of a stabilization or a bounce. And these two bars right here, that was stabilization, and it didn't bounce. I guess whatever longs were jumping on board there, and with the thought that it was going to go up, well, they all bailed, and it had this nasty drop here. So we'll see what happens here. It's at this significant support area here, and areas, they should be areas when you talk about support or resistance, rather than exact points like the Fibonacci method of looking for support or resistance within a decimal point. That's a bit of insanity. There are a lot of followers of that, of course, but just looking to the left of where there's support or resistance, it'll always, probably 99.9% of the time, it'll line up with any Fibonacci level that here's presented to you as that's the level that caused the turn. It's rare that you won't see actual price support right there. So from my perspective, just look to the left to see where the support is. All right, some stocks of interest here. As you know, Snap has been on my list. It'll be reporting earnings for the first time next week on the 10th. It's dealing with this resistance area right here. I'd like to see it consolidate into earnings, and we'll see what happens there. It's shaping up. Twitter had a great move here, and it's up against this resistance area. So, and I've mentioned end-of-day bases versus declines and advances, and I'm interested in this today as a possible intraday short. I'd like to see if the market actually got weaker, because I like market weakness with anything that I'm going to consider shorting as a day trade. But it's up against this resistance area here, and we got a topping tail, and it's a bit extended. So maybe we get some short-term weakness, and I would suspect there'd be buyers down in here. But we'll see how that all shapes up. But on a short-term basis, I think there could be some profits for a day trade on the short side there with that. And the weekly is looking good on this retest. Now, these retest patterns, I've had the experience with a lot of them that look fantastic over the years. And they really have to get through this major resistance area here, which it's stalled at. Because I've seen many times where these look great and they chop around at the resistance area and they just roll right back down again. Any of you that have followed, for example, G-Pro. Now, here it is. It's starting to break lower again. And if you look at the weekly time frame, there were times where it set up and, break down and it retraced back up, and it looked like, hey, we're going to be off to the races here. And now, breaks lower again and tried to go up. And, so you got to be careful with bottoming patterns. They're attractive from the point of, you can get in at the low prices there with the potential of a significant move. But if they don't work out, just step aside. Don't fall in love with them, because they can go a lot lower, as you can see what happened. This was like a money machine on the short side back then when it was falling like that. And all the G-Pro lovers, if you follow them on stock twits, they had every reason in the world why it was going to turn around, who was buying the stock, some news, some new product, blah, 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 and just, death. And it just looks terrible, continues to look terrible. Financials, what can drive this market higher? Well, the financials, have gotten really pounded here, and they showed some life. It really didn't go anywhere after that. And here's the life, gapped up, and now if they can chop around sideways here, maybe if they can get it going to the upside, where you've got this head and shoulders type of pattern here, if it can reverse that, that would be meaningful. So we'll keep an eye on that. A lot of these stocks are really a mess. So let's give them some time to see if they can, get something going here. And let's just look at the transports. Pretty messy. They didn't still underperforming. They couldn't get into this void of resistance area up there. And the Russell, it popped up to a new high after this sloppy consolidation, and now it's pulled back into the unfilled gap in the 20 and the 50. You got a bottoming tail there yesterday. It's a pattern that you might get attracted to just because of the pullback, but I would suggest to you to consider the angle of the pullback. This type of a pullback versus a more controlled type of a pullback, falling off the building, maybe it bounces a little dead cat bounce, but typically, you want these to go sideways a little bit, get away from this type of fear drop that goes straight down. I'm looking for something maybe, well, look right here, this type of a pullback where it's a more controlled, sloping angle, or some might call that a flag, versus, a straight down move. So when these pop up again, you've got this resistance right here. They typically come back down, and if they can form a W type of bottom, that's a much more attractive setup to consider a long versus a straight down move with a bottoming tail. All right, that's it, guys. Have a great weekend, and we'll do another update on Monday morning.